I'm assuming I am live at this moment. I'll have to check to see if I am, and then we can get started. It does seem to be the case that I am live, so that's pretty cool. Hello, thinkers, welcome to the Apex Mind. Today, we are going to react to Alex O'Connor again, Sadhguru again, and we are going to get more of an understanding of them, get more things to talk about, and maybe I'll sprinkle in some other things towards the end of the stream as well. So let's see if people join, and as long as I have at least one or two viewers, I can start with reacting. Let's see. All right, so we have at least one person here. So, hello, whoever you are, and we're going to react to Alex O'Connor and Sadhguru. So, let's get right into it. We'll start with this. So, this is ranting philosophy hot takes from my comment section by Alex O'Connor. Let's see what are the philosophical hot takes from his comment section, and how does this turn out?
Rating your philosophical hot takes episode something. Let's go. Giving someone a bad haircut is morally worse than killing them. Might make a video on it at some point in the future.
I forgot I'm supposed to switch this thing up. Okay, I'll have to restart this. Let us. Maybe I can just add this in the mix also. I'm at it. Yeah, this is working. Works. This is working. Yes. Okay, so I think we are more or less ready. If I can just change something else as well, though. Yes. Okay. All right, everyone. We have to get on here and restart all of this. All right. Let's get started again.
Rating your philosophical hot takes episode. Rating your philosophical hot takes episode something. Let's go. Giving someone a bad rating your Rating your philosophical hot takes episode something. Let's go. Giving someone a bad haircut is morally worse than killing them from that person's perspective. You know, of course, this sounds...
I mean, as a joke, I get it. From that person's perspective. I get it. So the point is, if you do kill someone, they're not going to have a perspective, right? If you randomly put a gun at the back of my head and shoot it, and I instantly die, then my perspective ends, right? So technically it is nothing NA, therefore neutral, compared to if I gave someone a bad haircut, which means then they have a net negative experience. That is why killing is less bad from their point of view. Makes sense. A lot of things are worse, but this also assumes there is no experience of getting killed, because then that experience itself will be worse.
It's kind of spicy, but I'm actually going to give it mild, because at root, this is just a mild commentary on the nature of death. The thing that's being gotten at here is that once you die, nothing can really harm you. In other words, your death isn't actually bad for you. The process of dying could be really painful and bad in that way, but death itself is something that by definition you won't experience, and so...
Yeah, that is why when you're killing someone, if the process is instantaneous in that sort of death, it is not. It is less worse than having a bad haircut.
So anything that's bad for you in any sense has to be worse for you than your death is, because it's something that you will actually experience. It is worth pointing out a few assumptions that might be embedded here. One is that death really is the end. Of course, if there is some kind of afterlife and that afterlife is good, then killing them might be doing them a
Fine, but that is putting assumptions where there do not need to be assumptions. For example, what happens if I drop this? The logical answer is it is going to fall down. But that is assuming that at this very instance there was not going to be an interdimensional trampoline just teleporting on here and bouncing it back. It would only be an assumption if it had a like good probability of being true basis on the information that we already have. The problem with afterlife is that it is specific to certain religions, and it's not a logical requirement that afterlife should exist, and therefore it is more of what do you call, a narrative that is accepted by a number of people. Does not mean not considering it is taking an assumption. No.
favor, and so it would still be morally worse to give them a haircut from their perspective. But suppose they were going to hell, your free action to kill them, if it happens to come at a point in their life when, say, they don't believe in God and that sends them to hell, you might have been basically responsible for sending them to hell there. That would be worse from their perspective than a bad haircut. Probably. Bad haircuts can really, really ruin my day. But it's interesting how the commenter didn't just say that this would be worse for the person, but morally worse. As if the moral rightness or wrongness of an action.
But morality is universal in nature. It is objective in nature, right? Things or actions are good or bad. If the commenter claimed, which I'm not sure if they did, let me just recheck if the commenter did claim what Alex is saying, right?
That's being gotten at root, this
Okay, just yeah, giving someone a bad haircut is morally worse than killing them from that person's perspective. I think the commenter is correct on this. I'll get you. So, yes, it is morally worse, but morally worse from an objective standpoint, right? Morality does exist universally, but by if I want to tell you anything about morality, I'm going to do it by my own perception, by my own experience. And if experience itself ends for me because I die, then morality, living, being, everything stops at that moment from for me, and therefore it was a morally neutral act for me. So morality can be objective, yet within my perception, it just stops existing in this particular case.
you in any sense. Worth pointing out a few assumptions that might be embedded here. One is that death really is the end. Of course, if there is some kind of afterlife and that afterlife is good, then killing them might be doing them a favor, and so it would still be morally worse to give them a haircut from their perspective. But suppose they were going to hell, your free action to kill them, if it happens to come at a point in their life when, say, they don't believe in God and that sends them to hell, you might have been basically responsible for sending them to hell there. That would be worse from their perspective than a bad haircut. Probably. Bad haircuts can really, really ruin my day. But it's interesting how the commenter
Alex has a thing. So he has a sort of binary framing of reality in which either the materialist reality is correct or the Judeo Christian reality is correct. I find it very limiting given the fact that he is aware of Eastern faiths, he is aware of different philosophies also, yet he almost subconsciously uses a binary framing when trying to discuss reality. In this example, it was either there is nothing after death, the materialist, rationalist, or empirical framing of this, or the second option that he took was that there is a Judeo Christian afterlife. There are multiple sorts of afterlife, my guy. Many don't even have a concept of hell. So if you're saying either or in this particular case, then that is reducing the different viewpoints of afterlife, the different viewpoints of not afterlife, which is a habit that I've noticed a lot in Alex, by the way. Okay, Hello, Ilma. Ilma is here, and Ilma is saying that I think no one wants to accept death as the end of the universe, as the end of their existence. Evolutionarily speaking, we are doing everything to exist, and to accept death is to accept that you won't exist after a specific time, thus creating all the ideas of afterlife. I get what she's trying to say. That evolutionarily speaking, because we're designed to survive, that because we are designed to want to seek survival, therefore thinking of a state of being in which we don't survive is antithetical to that concept, and therefore there is a sort of bias within our head which makes us so we would rather imagine that life or conscious existence continues. It is a product of our biology, not something we decided upon. Very interesting perspective. I really like this.
I didn't just say that this would be worse for the person, but morally worse. As if the moral rightness or wrongness of an action kind of depends on the victim's views on the matter, on how the victim feels about the action. There are
No, morality is not contingent on the victim's action. He's making everything flat. It's not very flat. Morality is universal. Yes, killing someone is wrong, but you can only perceive it as wrong if you're a party viewing it, or you're the person who kills, or you're some like one of those two, right? Because you are able to see what happened. If you die, you do not see what happened, existence stops for you, and therefore morality stops being there for you. That is the point of the commenter. Alex is misunderstanding this.
are some ethical theories which do treat this as if it's true. For example, consequentialist theories like utilitarianism. The way that somebody reacts in terms of the amount of suffering that they experience is the determinate factor in the morality of an action. With utilitarianism, though, of course, you can't just consider that person's viewpoint, the suffering that they experience. You have to consider the impact that any action will have on the suffering of the world in general, altogether. And so to say that something is morally worse for...
But then utilitarianism also assumes a third person objective point of view when the commenter clearly outlined that it was from the perspective of the one getting killed. Therefore, Alex is wrong.
Or somebody from their perspective would seem to imply a view of ethics where the only thing that's relevant in determining whether something is morally right or wrong for you is your viewpoint on the matter, which is essentially a kind of moral subjectivism. But if the point being made here is just that in your subjective assessment, the haircut would feel worse than your death, this is just making a kind of trivial point about
Alex has completely missed this. He has no understanding of what is going on at this point, I feel.
Subjective preferences. I could say this about any two options. I could say that if one person just for whatever reason happens to prefer being tortured for 1,000,000 years versus living with their family for a normal 80-year existence, then from their perspective, that would be the morally preferable thing. Sure, but that's kind of uninteresting. It's just saying that on subjective ethics, your subjective preference determines what's ethical. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. The death case is a bit more interesting, though, in that you're kind of forced into a particular preference. It's not just, well, if you happen to prefer this or prefer that. It's like you can't experience anything.
Again, not a matter of preference. He's confusing things.
When you're dead. And so you can't have...
It's a matter of perspective, not preference. Your perspective itself ends, and your perspective is the basis of judging anything in the outside world. So if your perspective ends, then that act is basically neutral or meaningless to you.
Preferences when you're dead. And so the bad haircut has to be worse for you. Some people will dispute this. There's a big philosophical literature on what, if anything, makes death bad. I'd like to do a video on it at some point in the future. But for example, there is the deprivation account, which says that death is bad for the person who dies because of what it deprives them of. The problem is, of course, that they don't experience the deprivation. And so one response to this view is to say that deprivation can only be bad if you're aware that you're being deprived. Another interesting problem is that the moment you try to ascribe some positive badness to death, especially in a kind of quantifiable sense, like the number of experiences you're being deprived of, you seem to run into this problem. Suppose you compare Shakespeare and Mac Miller, right? They're both dead. But Shakespeare has been deprived of many more experiences than Mac Miller because he's been dead much longer. So is death worse for Shakespeare, like right now, than it is for Mac Miller?
There is no Shakespeare to experience it. It doesn't matter, right? It cannot be for Shakespeare because Shakespeare is not in a position of be anymore.
Right now. That doesn't seem quite right. Well, one response to this is to say that the deprivation account only applies to things you're deprived of that you otherwise would have experienced given a natural course of human life. So like 80
Natural course does not matter. This is a metaphysical argument. This is not a naturalistic or an empirical argument. Like, people are just like confusing philosophy with a lot of different things.
90, 100 years or so. But that seems kind of arbitrary because, at least in principle, we could one day extend human lifespans. Imagine we develop some technology at some point in the future which allows us to live for 1,000 years. Would it be that...
Yeah, so Alex is going to keep circling this point again and again, and I think I'll end up repeating myself a lot. So I think we're done with reacting to that particular comment, and Alex has made his point. Now he's elaborating on examples, so we can move ahead.
an additional 10% off as well. That said, let's move on. Too much empathy is just as damaging as too much aggression. Mild. This does seem maybe a little bit...
Too much empathy is just as bad as too much aggression. Let's analyze this better. Right. So, let's firstly define what empathy is. That is very necessary to do, right? So, and aggression. Both terms should be very clear before we try and judge them against each other. And there is a lot of confusion between empathy and what is empathy specifically. So, now empathy. Okay, this is flashing. Yeah, please calm down. Please calm down. Please calm down. This is annoying. I think it works. Yeah. So empathy is what is empathy? It's a person. Here is a person. Here is another person, right? Person A and person B. Now, person A's ability to know. Now, the person A's ability. This is person A's thought. This is person B's thought. Now, his ability to understand the thought or the feeling or whatever is inside of person B's head. That ability, this ability is called as empathy. Do not confuse empathy with being kind or empathy with feeling bad for the other person. It is their ability to understand and sometimes mimic the ability of the feelings or the thought process of other person. So basically, if someone is a good predictor of what you think, that person has very high empathy. If someone is a good manipulator, that would require them to understand how your feelings are, where they are at a moment, and how they're going to evolve. So it's a power of sorts, empathy, right? It cannot be negative. Therefore, the only think about it. This is an additional power, right? This is like being able to fly. Now, being able to fly itself has some detriments also, in the sense that you can get stuck in a tree, maybe in another airplane. It comes with risks, but ultimately, it is a additional ability. Similarly, this empathy thing will also be an additional ability that not many people might have, and as such, this should be considered to be wholly positive. If I had to think of negative aspects of empathy or where empathy could be problematic, then it would probably be maybe you don't act upon well by knowing what they think, right? Maybe you end up manipulating the other person, but even if you do manipulate the other person, then you're doing it for your own good, so it is good for you anyway. So I don't think empathy can be bad. That is my take as of right now, that empathy cannot be negative. Next up is aggression. Aggression can come out as anger, violence, and a bunch of other stuff. And I think we can all agree that aggression can be problematic. It could lead you to life and death situations. It could lead you to a lot of conflict. It could lead you to a lot of losses. And that is all the negativity of aggression. The positive aspect of aggression would be declaring your case, surviving certain situations, uh, being able to handle conflict and like actual conflict. So it's a mixed bag and highly likely to be negative in the modern society context. And on the other hand, empathy is completely clear. Empathy is completely a superpower of sorts. And as such, I think the commenter is wrong that too much empathy could be problematic as too much aggression is. I think the misunderstanding is probably how the this commenter understands empathy to be. I think they're confusing empathy with kindness or niceness. Of course, if you're too nice, you're going to have problems. Like people are going to step over you, people are going to treat you like a doormat. You're going to be taken advantage of. But the problem is the terminology that he's using. Empathy is if he means empathy itself, as I've defined it, if he means empathy is can have the capacity to be as bad as aggression in certain cases, then I disagree completely. If he's saying kindness or niceness can be as bad as aggression, that is a debatable stance. We'll have to list out all of them and do a pro con analysis. But it does have niceness does have a lot of situations where it can be problematic for you at least. Let's see what Alex says.
That if one person just for whatever reason happens to prefer being tortured for 1,000,000 years versus living with their family for a normal 80-year existence, then from their perspective, that would be the morally preferable thing. Sure, but that's kind of uninteresting. It's just saying that on subjective ethics, your subjective preference determines what's ethical. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. The death case is a bit more interesting, though, in that you're kind of forced into a particular preference. It's not just, well, if you happen to prefer this or prefer that. It's like you can't experience anything when you're dead. And so you can't have preferences when you're dead. And so
Oh, we were still on this. Sorry about that. Too much empathy one.
too much empathy is just as damaging as maybe a little bit controversial, because when was the last time this does seem maybe a little bit controversial, because when was the last time you met somebody and faulted them for being too empathetic? Like, that person just cares too much about other people. It seems ridiculous to say, but there is a sense in which you can imagine that person being stunted and actually ending up being someone that you kind of didn't want to hang out with, because it gets a bit annoying how often they're constantly making sure everybody's okay and really trying not to do anything that might even possibly upset another person. It could make them quite a difficult person to be around. And this idea that two extremes, both being the opposites of each other.
Alex is making the same mistake. He's confusing empathy with kindness or niceness. I would expect I would expect someone like Alex in his particular position to be more thorough with his terms. That's a very bad look, Alex.
Are actually also about as bad as each other shows up quite commonly in the history of philosophy. In Plato's Philebus, he talks about the importance of proportion. In the words of Socrates, he writes, "Well then, if we cannot capture the good in one form, we will have to take hold of it in a conjunction of three: beauty, proportion, and truth." In other words, just as important as beauty and truth is proportion. You shouldn't overdo it. But most famously, and more specifically, in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, he discusses virtues as sitting in between excess and deficiency. An example he gives is the continuum between fear on one side and confidence on the other. If you have a deficiency of confidence, then you're a coward. But if you have too much confidence, then you're acting rashly. And both of these are bad. In between the two, with just the right amount of confidence, is what we call courage. And for Aristotle, this is an example of a virtue. And likewise, in between being boastful and being unduly
So he's invoking Aristotle. He's invoking Socrates. In order to prove a point that too much of anything is bad, right? He could have given more concrete evidences also. See, I'm all for reading philosophers, right? And I'm extremely heavy on philosophy. Like, just look at all the 120 videos I've made on this channel. But don't believe in you using philosophical or philosophers as authorities. Hell, even philosophical frameworks as authoritative way of dictating reality. I believe everyone should be able to understand where that logic of excess being wrong comes from. Everyone should understand where that concept of too much being wrong comes from, instead of quoting philosophers. That's uh, that's not the kind of mindset you ought to have, and definitely not the kind of mindset I preach through my channel.
Overly modest is being truthful. In between being a buffoon and being boring is being witty. And this concept of striking a balance between two excesses is known as the golden mean, that golden zone in between excesses that makes up virtue. This is a really important concept in virtue ethics, dating back to Aristotle, one of the most important philosophers of all time. But kind of because of that, I just don't think this is a very spicy take. Alex needs to
Eh, I mean, sure. I think it's not a spicy take. I think it's a very wrong take. Personally, I always end up dividing things in right and wrong. Anyway, so Ilma here says, I don't agree that too much of everything is bad. She says, being too passionate about something doesn't make it wrong. Always trying to change the balance usually doesn't take you anywhere in life. I do agree that seeking balance for the sake of balance is something which inherently leads you to inertia and resisting any sort of change. But I don't agree that being too passionate is not necessarily wrong. Being too passionate can, in fact, be wrong. Being too passionate would make it so that you don't allow other aspects of your life to interfere in the process of something you're passionate about. Let's assume I'm very passionate about a project I am taking care of. Now, if I am so passionate that I start neglecting my child who does not get food on time, who does not uh, get their diapers changed, like the responsibilities that I owe to my family, to my friends, if I completely forego them in favor of my passion, then that is too much fashion. That is too much passion. So passion can in fact be too much. We have this example. There is a logical example in which passion can be too much.
spicy take. Alex needs to regrow his mustache. Spicy. It's a controversial take. Look, the mustache. I did.
Did he spend like okay, all right, yeah, another one.
A Graham's number, very large number, amount of people getting a speck of dust in their eye, which would have a small but existing increase in suffering, is worse than one person getting brutally tortured until the heat death of the universe.
That takes the assumption that suffering is quantitative. So it's suffering is like a number, and therefore if you add multiple ones you can lead to a million, the same way as you can just have 1 million separately. That is in fact spicy, I would say, because the way that we understand suffering, it is qualitative, right? Getting slapped like this on my hand and getting it done 3 times makes me have the same amount of damage as getting slapped across the face. But the difference in suffering is very much so. This, even though it might hurt this, it even though it might hurt the same in the sense of causing damage, it in the moment it does not cause as much of a mental and psychological effect on me, therefore not as much of a suffering as right now just like slapping myself. That was more suffering. Therefore suffering is greater than the sum of its parts and could be qualitative in nature. That is my so very hot take. And once again, I don't agree with this hot take either.
spicy. That one's definitely spicy. That's not to say it's particularly unique as a thought. It comes up all the time in response to consequentialism. But to say that it is actually true is what makes it spicy. Utilitarians believe that we should maximize the amount of pleasure for everybody. There are kind of two ways of doing this. You can
So even in this, Alex is assuming that the quantitative model of suffering is true. That you can add a million ones of suffering in order to form a 1 million suffering. Uh, that is a bigger leap than how we understand suffering um, from a cultural level and also from a psychological level.
either increase the amount of pleasure that individual people feel, or you can increase the number of people who are experiencing the same amount of pleasure. Both of these seem to have the effect of raising the overall amount of pleasure in the universe. If we're just trying to minimize suffering, then comparing one person being tortured until the end of time versus another getting a speck in their eye, it's quite clear that the second of those is preferable. But at least in principle, as long as you add a sufficient number of people getting a speck of dust in their eye and suffering for it, you will balance out the amount of suffering experienced by that one guy being tortured forever.
Again, he is assuming a quantitative model of suffering. I don't agree with that. I believe suffering is qualitative. Suffering is psychologically imprintable. Then it is called suffering, right? Because suffering requires three things. It requires the stimulus, which would be the slap. It would require the, what do you call, a subject to feel that stimulus. That will be me, and it will also require a sort of response, which will be the psychological or the physical effect on my body. He's assuming that the psychological effect will be same quantitatively. Sorry, yeah. So I don't agree with this.
To be clear, this does kind of assume that suffering can be quantified, something that
He got it. He got it. That's great.
utilitarianism itself might need to assume. But even if we couldn't know in practice how many people we'd actually need to get a speck of dust in their eye for it to balance out the torture, we can know
How many people we could need to balance out that statement also assumes quantitativeness of suffering. I wonder if Alex noticed it.
that in principle there would be such a number. And that number might be absolutely huge. That's
So he questioned the quantitative model. He like at least pointed out the fact that it is based on assumption, and then you continue. Then he continued to take that assumption. What?
why the questioner says a Graham's number. A Graham's number is just like a mathsy thing, and it's a really, really big number. So some people look at this example and say, yes, utilitarianism does conclude that there is a number of people getting a speck of dust in their eye that would be worse than torturing someone for eternity. And you've got two options here. You either say, I think utilitarianism is true, therefore that conclusion just is true, or you say, that conclusion is definitely false. Therefore, I think utilitarianism is false. Most of the time when this kind of example comes up, it's in the second context, to disprove utilitarianism. It's what we call a reductio ad absurdum.
I agree. It is just taking a very ridiculous example and trying to reduce it, but it is also a false binary. I think a false binary fits here better than the reductio ad absurdism. Because I don't know. I know that reductio ad absurdism is a rhetorical tactic, but if it logically makes sense, then it does. So doesn't matter how convincing something sounds. What matters is whether or not it makes sense.
Or reduction to absurdity. This is the process of taking an idea or argument, pushing it to a logical conclusion, showing that logical conclusion is a bit ridiculous or absurd, and therefore demonstrating that the premise it relies on must be false. But this commenter has just bitten the bullet and said, yeah, I think that would be worse. So that's why I'm giving it spicy. By the way, a utilitarian might try to get out of this by saying, okay, well, we should be maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering, not in terms of the number of people, but in terms of the amount that individuals feel, or at least that the intensity within individuals
So a qualitative argument that I was talking about earlier.
counts for more than the number of people experiencing pleasure or suffering. In that case, though, you just run up against a different counterexample popularized by Robert Nozick in Anarchy, State and Utopia called the utility monster. Imagine, for a moment, some kind of utopia called the utility monster.
Let's read it. So, the utility monster is a thought experiment in the study of ethics created by this person. A hypothetical being which Nozick calls the utility monster, receives more utility from each unit of a resource that it consumes than anyone else does. Okay, for instance, eating an apple might bring only 1 unit of pleasure to an ordinary person, but also could bring 100 units of pleasure to a utility monster. If the utility monster can get so much pleasure from each of the units of resources, it follows from utilitarianism that the dissolution of resources should acknowledge this. If the utility monster existed, it would justify the mistreatment and perhaps the annihilation of everyone else according to the mandates of utilitarianism, because for the utility monster, the pleasure it receives outweigh the suffering that it may cause. The thought experiment should actually not egalitarian, but I mean, it kind of breaks if there exists just a singular utility monster, right? He is equivalent to 100 people, but there are 7.8 billion people in the world, so yeah, his utility will matter more, but there are so many more people that collectively they end up uh, proving to be more utility based, and therefore they shouldn't be killed in favor of him. The moment he kills or like causes harm to like more than 100 people, he stops being a utility monster in this particular example. That aside, even this assumes that suffering or pleasure or utility specifically could be quantified. That is an assumption. That's not true. At least it's not very clearly true. It's ambiguous.
Imagine, for a moment, some kind of conscious being who is extremely sensitive to pleasure and suffering, to the extent that if you do something to it that's normally pleasurable for an average human being, it experiences 1,000 times the amount of pleasure, 1,000,000 times the amount of pleasure from exactly the same kind of action. Once again, as long as that being's sensitivity to pleasure is strong enough in relation to an average human being, you seem to run into the conclusion that any possible resource of pleasure, any kind of unit of utility, should always be given to this so-called utility monster. If I'm hungry and the utility monster is also hungry, the utility monster is going to be in much more pain because he's much more sensitive to suffering. And by giving him some food, you're increasing the amount of pleasure in the world by orders of magnitude more than you would be by giving me that food. And again, the problem with this is that it just doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem like the correct thing to
But that is your feeling, right? That is not quantifiably. That is not. Just because you feel something is not right does not make it wrong. For example, let's say I am a murderer, right? And I killed a lot of people. Then people hold me down and people are like, you're going to get capital punishment for your actions. I'll be like, that does not seem right to me. Because why should I be killed? Right? And will you say that just because it feels wrong to me that it is wrong? You shouldn't rely on emotional subjectivity when you're talking about logic and objectivity here. I think he's making a fallacious argument.
do, especially given that this might lead to the conclusion that we should annihilate every other being that exists in the service of the utility monster, because we don't want them suffering, but we want to maximize pleasure. So
Yeah, but that utility monster is still the equivalent of simply 100 people according to that guy who gave the model. So if there are more people than 100, then you shouldn't completely prioritize the utility monster. It does not make sense to kill 8 billion people in favor of one utility monster, which is the equivalent of 100 people, right? Just treat him like 100 people, that's all.
the best way that we can maximize pleasure overall is to kill everybody else and just give everything to the utility monster. Utilitarians will sometimes reply by saying that, well, no such being exists, so what's the problem?
That's fallacious also, because again you're escaping the abstract argument, which pushes your logic to the extreme by simply appealing to empirical reality.
And in fact, in practice, pleasure aggregation seems to work in the opposite way. Like if you've got loads and loads of money, if you're a billionaire and someone gives you $1, it doesn't really add to your pleasure. But if you've only got $10 in your bank account and someone gives you $1, it means all the more. This is the opposite of the utility monster, who seems to just get more and more utility as the pleasure increases. But all of that
That wasn't actually outlined in the Wikipedia article he showed.
doesn't matter. I mean, sure, the utility monster doesn't exist, and it would seem a little bit weird if one did, but so what? It's still possible that such a being could exist. There's nothing logical.
That is also an assumption that it could be possible. Again, he's trying to tether it to reality when it is an abstract argument. You don't need to do it, man. Not everything has to be about this bottle existing for it to make logical sense. You're talking about abstract concepts, so obviously you're going to take them through abstract examples to stress test them. That is only fair.
Logically contradictory about such a being's existence, and as long as such a being is possible, it's enough to run against utilitarianism in principle. This is a reductio ad absurdum. If utilitarianism is the objectively correct ethical theory, then it should apply in all circumstances. And yes, this is a purposefully contrived set of circumstances with the utility monster, but its mere possibility is enough to test the principle of utilitarianism and see if it really does apply in all cases. Thus, Robert Nozick writes, utilitarian theory is embarrassed by the possibility of utility monsters. So yeah, utilitarianism has some interesting counterexamples, but
No, I think I demonstrated why it does not work. Right? I think the utility monster argument fails.
this commenter doesn't see this as a counterexample, but rather just a true conclusion of a true ethical theory. So yeah, spicy. If nothing can't exist, something must necessarily exist.
That's semantical wordplay, right? If that doesn't work, because he's saying that nothing can't exist. Nothing is synonymous as can't existing. So the correct sentence would, if nothing is nothing, then something is something. That is what he is saying here. But because he's using words like exist and adding, what do you call, he's adding adverbs to them like can't and necessarily, it confuses your brain. But it's really that nothing, if nothing is nothing, something is something, which is true.
I'm going to give this spicy. Perhaps the most foundational philosophical question is, why is there something rather than nothing? But there is a sense in which we could ask,
And that something is also an experience, is also an assumption. Hell, this is something, but it is also simply the senses worked according to my sensory information that I'm getting. The only reason this exists for me is because my hand is touching it, because my eyes are seeing it, and my brain is processing all of that information and creating a reality for me. It might not exist. Simply the process that something is going on, not something existing, but something is going on, that is truth. That is demonstrably, foundationally true. It's the same. I think it's very similar to Advait Vedanta.
well, could there have been nothing? Is that not a contradiction in terms for there to be nothing? Is nothing not the opposite of being? If so, then could there have been nothing? No, that's a contradiction in terms. There has to have been something. And that kind of trivially answers the question as to why there's something rather than nothing.
Matthew says that I think you're missing the point. Matthew, why don't you elaborate on how I'm missing the point, and I'll try and answer your question.
couldn't have been any other way. It's like asking why 2 plus 2 is 4. It just has to be. It's a matter of logic. But something doesn't seem quite right.
2 plus 2 has to be 4 because we assume the fact that units can exist in the world, abstractly speaking. We also assume that addition is a thing. It's like a bunch of philosophical assumptions that we called foundational axioms of mathematics that we have to assume, right? So 2 plus 2 being 4 assumes a bunch of things. Okay. Ilmayer says, if I'm confused. If there isn't nothing, then shouldn't it be something? Should I pull out the whiteboard for this one? That will be. These philosophical arguments, oftentimes you require a big ass whiteboard to make sense of things. Let's try this then. Alright. For the purposes of this explanation, we are going to take circle to be the same as thing, right? Or something, whatever. So, if circle is thing, then what is this? It's a thing, correct? It is also something, right? Thing, all of these are different somethings, right? Now I go to this part of the board which is empty. I say, what is this? The question is invalid. It's empty. It's not it's not anything, because for it to be anything, it had to be a circle. But since there is none, it can never be a thing. Therefore, it can never exist, right? It is the same argument that there was once in Young Sheldon, in which people were arguing that 0 does not exist. The point is that the word nothing, this word, nothing as a word, it is a signifier of non-existence. That makes sense. Because it just says, if this is thing, if circle is thing, then this is not thing. And not thing is no thing, it is nothing. It's a signifier of the fact of non-existence. I hope that was clear. Hopefully. And I hope I did not miss the point this time around. Alright. Again, kind of lost.
Thing rather than nothing. It couldn't have been any other way. It's like asking why 2 plus... I can conceive of the universe never having existed. At least I think I can. I'm not really sure what that looks like exactly, but let's say I can...
Okay, Matthew says he's just saying that nothing is impossible in the world. Why is it so hard to think something must exist? Must be 4. He's talking about material. He's not talking about material or objects, Matthew. If he was talking about objects or materials, then he would not be bringing up the concept of 2 plus 2, 4. That is an abstract understanding. Right? It is a philosophical axiom. Mathematics does not exist in the world. It is an abstraction we force upon the world in order to better understand it. It is in a abstract realm. So everything is fair game. Abstractions, categories, philosophical axioms, everything is a thing here, right? That is the point.
Can conceptually imagine it. And maybe that's relevant here. There is a difference between what Descartes called intellectual understanding and imagination. Descartes gives the example of a 112-sided shape. Can you intellectually understand what a 112-sided shape is? Yes. Right? You know what that means. There are mathematical truths about that shape that you could work out. And so there is a sense in which you intellectually understand what a 112-sided shape is. But can you imagine that shape? Like, can you picture it in your head? I can't, maybe some of you can, but that seems too difficult to me. And so just because you can't picture something, it doesn't mean you can't understand it as a concept.
See, again, he is bringing in examples of abstraction, not real things. That's a major difference that he's doing.
I can't picture nothing, but I seem to be able to understand what it means for there to have maybe been nothing. But maybe I'm just confused, because after all, the defining feature of nothing is that it, doesn't exist. There was one time when, in response to this question of how can something come from nothing, isn't that illogical, someone commented on one of my videos that true nothingness wouldn't contain anything, including the constraining axiom that something can't come from nothing. I mean,
True nothingness wouldn't contain anything, something can't come from nothing, and therefore being unbound in this way could generate the potential of being from itself. Ergo, something can come from nothing. Kind of. So the word nothing or the concept of nothing are two different things. The word nothing is a signifier of non-existence, right? It is a signifier of not being. That is it. Therefore, yeah, I think the commenter is right in that sense.
including the constraining axiom that something can't come from nothing. I mean, that axiom that something can't come from nothing is a thing. And so if there were really nothing, that constraining axiom wouldn't exist. So why wouldn't something be able to come from nothing? There's nothing constraining that from happening. It's quite an entertaining thought, right? But something about it just doesn't seem quite right to me.
Again, something does not seem right. I don't know why Alex keeps falling back onto the emotional side of the argument, his personal subjective experience. I mean, I guess when you're trying to make a interpersonal YouTube video, that is a good rhetorical tactic, but it's not very thorough, philosophically speaking.
Having said that, I can't quite put my finger on what it is that isn't quite right about it. And so, yeah, I'm going to give this spicy. To be allowed to
I like this the most so far. Let's go with the next.
spicy. To be allowed to vote, your IQ should be above a certain minimum, let's say 100.
Okay,
Not
that's more of a
only
positive
that,
take. We'll get to that. Let's just first react to. Okay, so Matthew says, I somehow understand his point, but not really yours. Uh, I don't know, man. I can't do more than the whiteboard. If you can be more specific in what exactly in what I'm saying is causing a problem of understanding for you is something that does not make sense to you, right? All of what I said, just point something that does not make sense to you from that, and I'll try again to make it clearer this time. Okay, and can you give more analogies for understanding this nothing concept? I'm not grasping it quite well. So everyone is saying that. Well, this is hard. Okay. I have to change this. Okay, get ready, folks. We are going to do more of a whiteboard thing. All right. I hope this works. Or maybe I should use another example that is clearer. Right. Let me see if it is visible. All right. So I am drawing a banana here, right? Consider it this to be a physical banana. I'm going to bring my chair closer. Yeah. And then I'm going to write the word banana, right? Now, what is the difference between these two things? The difference is that this is the object, so it is the signified, right? And this is the signifier. So when we have to present a banana in a language, in a concept, then we use this code in order to uh, encode the information of what a banana is. The letters B, A, N, A, N, A are the signifier for the object, which is a banana. Does it make sense? Right? Now, signifier could be for a lot of things. For example, this is a guy, right? The guy moves. He was in position A, now he is in position B. What did he do? He did an act. We take that act, right, and we signify it in letters by calling it moving, right? The real thing was his action, and the word is the signifier. Now you notice how the signifier could be used to refer to an object, it could be used to refer to an activity or a process, it could also be used to refer to abstract concepts like addition and subtraction, right? Even they can be used by calling them add and subtract. That is the point. Signifier could be for anything. So language, therefore, language acts as an encoder of information and understanding of reality by human beings, right? Now when we have to differentiate between something and nothing, so any of those things, if, if they are abstract in nature, no matter what they are ultimately encodable, right? They are encodable. So this encoder, which was language, it is able to encode all of these information. It doesn't matter what the information is, information can be encoded, and therefore this all of this information we call as thing, right, or something. So encodable information is called as something. then then if there is information which is encodable, logically it follows that there is information which is not encodable, cannot encode. And in a meta way, we name that as well. We call it the opposite. It is also, it is no thing. Might as well say it is the opposite of this. So what language cannot encode, it calls as no thing. So that concept of there not being a thing, it exists. That is what I am trying to say here. I hope nothing makes sense more now. Or something. Fuck it. I hate language. I hate language. I'm saying nothing makes more sense now, and now I'm saying, wait, that translates as something else entirely. But if I say something makes sense, it's annoying. Okay. Back. I am back. And back to the reaction first. Let's say what the chat thinks. Okay. Some more analogies. And when one say nothing, it means not a thing, as in not any matter. It doesn't literally mean nothing. It can be energy, whatever. Sadhguru gives a civil explanation on nothingness. Can you react to dark phase of creation? I'll react to this after I'm done with this video. Let's see what Matthew says. But encodable information can exist if and only if someone or something there to do encoding or language. I agree, Matthew. But that is a separate philosophical argument. It is more about the logic of our perception, right? Technically, the entirety of the universe and this bottle and everything, including you, and specifically you, only exist for me within my mind or within my brain processing. But that is a ontological argument, right? We are arguing what something exists or doesn't exist. This argument of nothing and something, it was not about it was more of a epistemic argument, how the limits of our knowledge and language come. So different fields. It's definitely hard to explain it immediately. Like a lot of professors take like many lectures to do it, but I'm trying to improve my capacity to make it more clear. The more you press on this, the specific points that you press me on in this particular thing, I'll be able to do it better. Okay. Uh, what exactly is the topic of today's video? So, PM, we are actually simply reacting to the hot philosophical takes in Alex Connor's comment section that he is reacting to. I am also giving my understanding of it, and so far we've done like 2-3 reactions, and we were just moving on to the next one. Currently, we are discussing uh, if nothing can exist, right? If the concept of nothing can exist, because the word nothing means not to exist. So I was explaining how it can by the means of language in which words act as signifiers. Okay. Uh, so there has to be something. Yeah, the signifier, the word nothing exists, right? But the concept that it is referring to, it's like uh, this is a bottle, my finger is pointing to the bottle, right? So, or my eyes are looking at the bottle, so the image in my eyes, it is the signifier, it is the word nothing. And this bottle existing, this is the nothingness, if that makes sense. The word is there, the word is within my eyes and my perception of it, and the reality of this bottle in the outside of universe, that is the concept of nothing. So both nothing can exist and the word nothing is something, right? That is the paradoxical way of viewing it, but it's not technically paradoxical because the word exists, it is referring to a metaphysical concept, and the concept is nothingness. How does one perceive no one doesn't perceive nothingness, that is the point. It's like okay, I think maybe I took the wrong example, because it is an abstract topic, so I wanted to make it very clear. See, I can perceive stuff, we can agree on that, right? I am able to perceive this, I can perceive anything. So if this is a neutral thing, right? To not be this is neutral or 0 point. 0 point says I don't know. Then the positive would be the ability to perceive, right? And the negative therefore should also exist, because just as poles balance out each other. So if there is conceptually the concept of perceiving something, there must also be the concept of not perceiving something. Similarly, if there is the concept of something, there should also be the concept of nothing. That's how it makes sense. Yeah, that is kind of the thing. It is because it is not experiential in nature, right? It is anti experience. You not being able to experience is the point, is what it is signifying to. It's like death. It's like my death. If I say my death, I can't picture it, because the moment I will die, I will not be able to uh, be there for my death. I cannot experience the fact that I am dead. So we can see death as in general, but your death is something that is never going to be real for you or not perceivable for you. But we all know by viewing the outside world that it is going to happen to us anyway. So it is real, it is going to happen, but I will not be able to perceive it. So for me, it is nothing. So the concept of nothing and something is similar. It We are biologically or physically, we're incapable of experiencing it, because the concept itself is the concept of not experiencing. Okay. The word banana or any verb terms of any language can't exist if human beings doesn't exist. Yeah, it actually goes quite deeper. Do you want me to get into the ontological implications of what that is? That is actually a new philosophical paper I am writing about reality and what is there, what isn't there, and what is really going on. And it does touch on this concept of things only existing within my mind, and therefore, technically speaking, you, I, and everything can only exist for me as long as I am viewing it. So it is within my mind, right? This bottle only exists as electrical impulses or interpretations of my brain. physically I can't tell if it exists or not. I expand on it, and it's a whole recursive model of understanding of universe. Okay. Definitely an interesting topic for me. Okay, be a little patient. This one is going to be really nice. Yeah, let's get to it. Going to get my chair here. Okay, all right, let's get this going. So, we the base layer of reality is material world. Now, what is material world? I think I should flip this video so that whatever I write can be read better. Oh, how can I do it? Flip it. Rename, transform, flip horizontally. Works. So this is material world, right? Material world is the world that is out there, universe, this bottle, this object, material world, right? Now, the way we understand the material world doesn't. Where does it exist? Where does this material world exist? It exists within our mind. It exists within our brain. So this is more true than this, right? Because between these two layers there is a filter. This filter is sensory information, right? Through eyes, ears, nose, whatever. The point is that because this is viewed through the mind is where reality is actually happening, right? The universe only exists within my mind because nothing can exist beyond my mind. That is the main thing. But we know, even indirectly speaking, we know for a fact that the mind, for the mind to exist, it should be in an actual universe. There is a universe, even though I'm not able to view it because of the lens, but there is something out there, right? And the mind exists somewhere. And that will be this, which I like to call as real ontological reality, or just consider it to be the real reality, and the empiric and the material world is simply a bad reflection that our mind views, right? This is the actual universe that we can't actually reach because we are limited by our senses and our mind. So the universe you view is less real, your mind's image is more real, and the actual universe your mind exists in is even realer. But now this is where up until this, most philosophical traditions would agree with me, doesn't matter who you ask. Now the radical concept that I am going to introduce personally is the fact that if the material world only exists if a mind views it, and the mind itself is part of a real ontological reality, therefore if we follow this logic chain, and for something to exist there must be something to perceive, there is a meta mind, a even higher observation point, another brain, so to speak, which views this level of reality. The meta mind, call it anything, it is the ultimate observer, right? This is the true observer, trademark. And this should follow, and it doesn't stop there either, it goes on. It's an infinite series, right? So it keeps stacking on top of each other up until infinity. This also supports the simulation hypothesis. This also supports a lot of hypotheses, and therefore the ultimate layer, or the ultimate truth layer, does not exist because it is an infinite series and the logic is airtight. That is my understanding of what reality is, and this is going to be a new paper that I'm going to write. It's rough around the edges. I'm going to polish it for sure, but this is my concept, and I'm very excited to see what my audience or at least people here in the chat think of it. Let me just flip it again. Don't like seeing my face like this. Where is transform? Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Let's see what everyone else has said so far. Huh. Not many comments till then. So I guess that was it mostly. Anyway, I did try and explain the model. It could have been a weird explanation, maybe not as clear. I tried my best, and I would have liked if you guys had reacted and told me something about it. Anyway, let's finish the Alex video. All right, another hot take. These are getting boring though. Let's go.
The power of your vote should be minimum. But something about it just doesn't seem quite right to me. Having said that, I can't quite.
Sounds fun, but it seems more like fan fiction. What are your reasons? Uh, Logical coherence. I told you demonstrably how things are in reality, something that all philosophical traditions, whether it be idealism, whether it be materialism, whether it be empiricism, they fundamentally agree. What people disagree upon in philosophy is what is this real ontological reality, or what is reality, right? Everyone is trying to reach it, but simply by being a human being and being trapped within our mind, it is inaccessible to us. But we know it exists. That is where people stop. I just propose a speculative new model which says that following the logic that any reality that we already know of required a mind to exist, and that mind exists within another reality. We just keep continuing that sequence because it has worked demonstrably so far. It's like if a uh, if a tree bears fruits of apple and it does it for 3 years, then you assume that fourth year itself will also be when it will bore apples and not bananas this time. That is an inductive leap that I've taken, an inductive logical leap, but it does follow. It is a well established logical system. Inductive reasoning is well established, science is based on it. So that is why I believe my philosophical model is quite airtight, although speculative because this is a new model. But there are certain traditions like Advait Vedanta, certain schools of Buddhism, Kashmiri Shaivism, which do agree with me on this particular point, although they don't make it into a spiral. They simply end the loop at the meta mind and then they say, I don't know, beyond that, only God knows, and then God is truth. That is what they say essentially. All right. But we only have three bridges. Three bridges. Yes, I get that, right? But we know that those bridges were a necessity for the world to exist as it is existing right now. They're very fundamental to the nature of reality, and therefore they're much more foundational than something like a bottle existing, right? that rec- the more the more foundational something is, the less repeatability it demands, if that makes sense. How can you say that it can lead to infinity? uh, I can say it can lead to infinity is because uh, the material world as we understand it exists within our mind, right? And we also understand that there is a actual reality in which the mind exists. Makes sense. But therefore, if the material world required a mind to exist, they, that means that that real world we are part of would also require an observer or a mind to exist. And then that mind would require a reality to preside in, and then that reality would require another observer, and that is the reason is going to keep going. To use an analogy, it is like putting two mirrors, again, two mirrors in front of each other. It loops until infinity. That's what this is essentially, right? Life is essentially water reflecting water. Okay, let's. I think we can continue with the Alex video.
To come from nothing. There's nothing constraining that from happening. It's quite an entertaining thought, right? But something about it just doesn't.
I believe only till our reality exists in our mind. So yeah, you're an idealist, right? But here is the thing. Idealism would say that your mind is the reality, if that makes sense. We are all trying to define what real reality is. Idealism says it is your mind, and materialism says that it is the material world, but they both implicitly agree that there is a reality. That is the thing, right? They say that your mind is the best way to get to that reality, that is the closest to reality. And empiricists say that material world is the closest to reality. They try and approximate reality, but they know that an ideal real reality does exist, and we just don't have an access to it, right? Mind is the closest we get. That is your stance, I believe. I mean, that would be your philosophical thorough stance.
Doesn't seem quite right to me. Having said that, I can't quite put my finger on what it is that isn't quite right about it. And so, yeah, I'm going to give this spicy. To be allowed to vote, your IQ should be above a certain minimum, let's say 100. Not only that, the power of your vote should be influenced by your IQ. So that, for example, a 200 IQ person should have twice the voting power of a 100 IQ person. This is how we can stop being held back by stupidity and still live in a democracy.
It's problematic, I would say. I I get the weighted thing that he's trying to do, but he takes a couple of assumptions. Firstly, he assumes IQ to be equal to intelligence, which is not the case. IQ is a test. IQ measures certain forms of abilities in certain very specific areas, which might not exactly be intelligence. For example, crystallized intelligence is a criteria of IQ which contributes like a substantial portion of IQ. Now, crystallized information is simply the knowledge you have. But just because someone has more knowledge does not make them more intelligent, right? We don't define intelligence like that. Intelligence is your ability to do stuff, not your stores of information. As such, the IQ test measurements they fail. But let's give this commenter the benefit of the doubt, and let's assume they are talking about intelligence, the word intelligence, right? If intelligence is the case, then we have to see what is the end that we are trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a more prosperous society. So we're assuming that intelligent individuals voting are going to take a better decision or a more informed decision when it comes to doing good for society, right? They will. That is the reason they should have more of a weightage. That's not true. Again, uh, your decision making ability could be extreme, and you can have a lot of information about how societies work, and you can take a better decision than an uninformed intelligent person. So intelligence itself also does not map, IQ itself also doesn't exactly map, uh, because the criteria is informed decision making. So it should be, I mean, I don't know how they'll go about it, but it should be that your vote matters as much as your decision making capacity is. It should be correlated with that, not intelligence.
I'm going to give this minty. Sorry. It's just that the first thing people consider when trying to solve the problems of democracy in an uneducated electorate is
Yeah, IQ.
let's have some kind of test to be able to vote. But immediately you run into all kinds of problems. Who is going to administer this test? Even if it's just an IQ test, Firstly, people dispute the efficacy of IQ tests, but secondly, who's going to design the specific IQ test used to determine whether or not you can vote? How are you going to ensure that it is completely immune from any kind of political influence, political bias, which will affect the test itself and self-select for particular political ideologies, giving them more voting power to elect in more people with more bias to administer more tests? This also assumes that voting is just about some rational attempt to get to the best kind of government, and that having a fair democracy is the best way to get an effective government. But a lot of people dispute this. They say democracy has all kinds of shortcomings, and some of those people still think we should live in a democracy because it's not just this rational attempt to get the best form of government, but rather voting is a right. If you're being
Yeah, it's more so about distributing power and make it so the people are responsible for themselves, right? Doesn't matter what the consequences of that is. It's just a human rights thing. It's just a way of introducing an egalitarian element to power.
governed over. You just have a right to have a say in how that government is set up and run. If that's the case, then your intelligence level should be completely irrelevant. Your rights are not dependent on how clever you are, after all. Like, if you really think the only thing that matters here is intelligence, that is the thing that should determine how government is set up, then why even vote in the first place? Let's just cut out the middleman. Whoever is running for office, let's run an IQ test, and whoever gets the highest, they become the prime minister or the president or whatever. That, of course,
Because again, that is not going to be able to correlate well to decision making capacity in a position of power and the ability to handle power. Intelligence is not like a magic wand that you can wave at anything and make it better.
just doesn't seem quite right to me. Having said all of this, the fear about uneducated people voting and the idea that there should be some kind of weighted voting system is not unheard of in the history of democratic thought. It's quite controversial to suggest it today because we're just so used to how democracies work in the modern world, but John Stuart Mill, for example, thought that people's voting power should be determined by their education level. So he thought that people with a university education
But education should be specific to, again, decision making capacity and how politics usually happen. So, about power.
should have more votes than people without a university education. So in a way, I think this take is kind of both wrong and also not that unique, which lands it squarely in the minty category. Monarchy is not that bad when done properly, actually.
It's not, I mean, that assumes what wrong is. That I think that assumes that being wrong or not being bad means not being efficient, right? It wouldn't lead to prosperity. So it's a utilitarian way of viewing power. But the point is, we have a sort of ethical way of viewing power. We don't want power to concentrate, because not only because it leads to consequences, but we also don't want to it to concentrate simply because it shows inequality in society, in terms of human value, right? Power shifts the balance of values. The power shifts the balance of ethics, and we want to avoid that. The way to make everyone equal is for everyone to share power. That is the idea there, right? And when it comes down to the outcomes, once again, this is going to will need to take, again, multiple examples, a data set of the different sorts of monarchies across the world, which ones worked, which ones did not work, what were the conditions, what constitutes a well done, properly done monarchy. Hell, democracy can be properly done as well, but the comment itself is not comparing monarchy to democracy. I'll give him that. So monarchy is not that bad when done properly. Yes, if you have an idea of what doing properly means, and secondly, if it is about the outcome of society rather than equality of power.
Spicy. I agree with this. I've had a lot to say about the British monarchy and called for its abolition, which is still technically illegal in the United Kingdom, by the way, so Whoops, I guess. But people have falsely labelled me as an anti-monarchist. It's slander. I'm not an anti-monarchist, I'm anti-British monarchy. The British monarchy is essentially a self-defeating institution that claims to retain this right to rule through bloodline whilst also being the head of a liberal democracy. It's contradictory, it doesn't make any sense. And in a lot of the places that matter, the monarchy doesn't have any real practical power, making it kind of redundant as well. But that's not to say that if done properly, monarchy wouldn't be a great form of government.
If done properly, a lot of things would be good, but yeah.
I've never lived under one, I don't know, but it certainly doesn't follow from the shortcomings of the British monarchy that monarchy in principle is bad. But in this day and age, I think that is a relatively uncommon and controversial opinion, so yeah, it's spicy. Free will.
Okay. On the last comment, I don't. On the last comment about IQ for voting, one commenter here says that I don't get this comment. I mean, how does it make you less of a human that you can't even make decisions? How does it make you less of a human that you can't even make decisions for your life only because you're little dumb than others? Yeah, I mean, see, they if you are valuing consequences of society, and if you're assuming that intelligence means better decision making capacity, then in that particular case intelligence mm, would be the metric to look for when deciding whose vote matters how much, right? But the point of, again, democracy is not consequences. The point of democracy is shared equality. So that's it's a self defeating concept if you consider the point of what democracy is all about. Okay, next up.
Spicy. Free will can be proved by the fact that different people regularly make different choices based on the same information.
No, different people have different genetic makeups, different people have different environments growing up, different people have different what do you call, experiences. All these three contribute to who you biologically are programmed to be and inform all of your decisions, right? Different people act differently in the same situations because they are inherently different things. Cats are going to react differently, right? Two cats are going to react differently to the same things. That does not mean that they are not biologically programmed to act a certain way. It is just that individual variation exists within that programming on the basis of genetics, on the basis of experiences, and on the basis of upbringing.
Minty, again, sorry. The argument that there's no free will suggests in one form that people are essentially products of their causal environments. There's a bunch of input data, the experiences that they have, the information they have access to, and then there's output, their decisions, their actions, their behavior. And the anti-free will crowd says that you don't have any control in how that input is transformed into output. It just kind of happens. So this commenter is suggesting that sometimes there are two people with access to the same information who yet make different choices, meaning that it can't just be a case of blind input and output. There must be something more that determines why one person did one thing and another did the other thing, and that is free will. But in order for this to work, the two people would have to be the same. Like, sure, if they're trying to decide what to do right now and they both have the same information relevant to that decision, it might seem weird that they come to different conclusions, but there are all kinds of things going on in the background.
Yeah, again, I think he's circling to the same point that I made. Again, three factors that determine the way that you take decisions: genetic information in your biology, then your upbringing, and then your personal experiences, right? That is where the variation exists. And we know that free will does not exist because whether or not I'm going to throw this marker across the room right now has been decided by my brain 7 seconds before I do anything, and I decided not to throw it anyway.
Upbringing, their habits, their ingrained preferences, even like whether
I meant 7 seconds before I'm aware of what I'm going to do.
they've eaten recently can have a serious effect on the decision that they make in that moment. And so to ensure that these two people really do have the same inputs despite their different choices, you would have to make sure that they did really have all of the same inputs. That is, the same upbringing in the same place with the same parents, the same experiences, the same friendship group growing up, the same conversations
Yeah, again, genetic information, experiences.
with those same friends. In other words, you would have to just describe a single person, because if you make all of those things the same for two people, you're not describing two people anymore. You're just describing one person. So in other words, I'm disputing this take on the grounds that I don't think such a scenario can exist.
Agreed, I suppose. I mean, then that is this parallel realities with literally no difference. Then what's the point? How are they parallel? They are only parallel when they are slightly different, right?
Of course, two people can hear the same considerations and choose two different things, but there will be other factors at play. I don't think there can be two people who
Hell, I think Alex is giving a lot of charitable interpretations to this particular person when I believe this person was probably thinking very narrowly to begin with.
genuinely have the exact same inputs in every single relevant way and yet choose to do something different. I just don't think that's possible. Of course, if you believe in free will, then you might just disagree with me on this point, but there's certainly never been a test case. There have never been two people.
There really can't be. I mean, maybe if you do a Truman Show type thing, in which you make like two simulations completely equal with the same actors doing the same thing, the same robots, and you clone a baby essentially as an embryo, and then you raise them and provide them the exact minute to minute same experiences, then you test them. That's probably how we can prove the free will thing here.
People with exactly identical inputs in every possible relevant respect that we can look to in order to test whether free will exists or not. And so, given that the questioner seems to assume that such pairs do exist or have existed at least at some point, they must just be talking about this kind of surface level similar input, that there's some decision to make and that two people have access to the same information there and then. Pairs
Yeah, the real thing. It's not as charitable as he was earlier thinking of.
like that definitely exist. They exist all the time, but they move us exactly 0 millimeters towards the conclusion that free will exists. Individuals should be allowed to safely use drugs if they wish to in specialized institutions built for that purpose. The emergence of practical problems is inevitable, but this should theoretically be an option in an ideal case.
If those individuals are completely informed of what is going to happen if they take the drugs, the potential side effects, the percentage likelihood of said side effects, and they can completely they have the ability to understand the consequences and make an informed consenting decision, then yes, allow them everything.
I think I've had this, actually. I think if this is going to be about drug decriminalization, I'm bored. If you want drug decriminalization, good luck and enjoy the society you get as a result. But frankly, I'm sick of the subject, and I'm also sick to death of the people who promote it.
Yeah, I mean, people have intentions, but philosophically the argument stands. Anyway, this was my reaction to Alex O'Connor's comment section and his own takes. This has been fun. I think the live stream has gone on for how long exactly? 1.5 hours. So I can't. I'm really sleepy. So not Osho today. Okay, what is Shunya saying? Dark face of creation. Okay, Shunya, I'm just going to look at it for a bit and see how long it is. If it is too long, I might not be able to do it today. Because with these things, I end up taking a lot of time. Right. Alright. Let's go. Dark face of creation. Sadhguru. It's not too long. I think we can do this. Alright.
So that dimension which I am referring to as a source of creation right now, what is its nature? Which is what I believe scientists are trying to figure out in some way. So, if I have to describe it in some articulation, we can only say it's nothingness. When I say nothingness, the moment I say nothingness, immediately in normal English language it has a negative connotation of not being anything or not worth anything. If I say you are nothing, it is understood as you're no good. So I'm not…
Yeah, he's confusing the semantical thing. I get it. So when he started, Osho talked about the same thing that I like did. He was talking about this, right? He said that we're trying to find this, and this is where all of creation and everything comes from, and we only understand this and this. That is what he's like, I think, trying to say. And now he's talking about nothing, but he's confusing how the word is used when it is used as an adjective for a person, right? An adjective of the character of that person. It becomes a different signifier on the basis of that context. So there's that.
not referring to nothing in that sense. Probably we would understand it better
He's saying we're not referring to it in that sense. Fine.
if you put a hyphen between no and thing. It is not a thing. It is non-physical in nature. So whatever you try to say about it in definition or in description is bound to be wrong even before you utter it, because it's non-physical in nature. So this non-physical nature, if you look at it, it has a fringe nature. It has a core nature which is absolutely non-physical, and it has a fringe nature which is dark, and it's a transition from non-physical to physical. I don't know, we should ask an ophthalmologist why it is so, but when I really look at…
Wait. So is he talking… we're going to rewind this. I want to get a clear visual idea of what he's talking about.
because it's non-physical in nature. So whatever you try to… it is non-physical in nature. It is not a thing. If you put a hyphen between no and thing, it is not a thing.
Okay.
It is non-physical in nature.
So anything which is non-physical in nature would come under his definition of nothing, right? Then mathematics would come under the definition of no thing. Then an imaginary elephant right now in my head is going to come under his definition of no thing, because that elephant does not have a that does not have a physical form. So his definition of nothing is not the same as the void definition of nothing or zero definition of nothing. Keep a mind of that. I don't want him to be slippery about it and then like change this definition mid discussion.
And is bound to be wrong even try to… it is non-physical in nature. So whatever you try to say about it in definition or in description is bound to be wrong even before you utter it, because it's non-physical in nature.
No, doesn't have to be. I can understand the concept of mathematics, even though it is non-physical in nature. I can understand the imagination in my head, even though it is non-physical in nature, and I'll be right about it because I'm the source and generator of that.
So this non-physical nature, if you look at it, it has a fringe nature.
Exactly, Ilma is getting the point. The way that he defines nothing, it is anything which is not physical in nature. Then every abstract idea, concept, love is non-physical in nature, war is non-physical in nature. I mean, the concepts. So does love become nothing? According to Sadhguru, it technically qualifies as nothing in his definition. So I have a problem with the definition. I don't think it is very thorough in how we understand nothing to be. I believe he's going… I mean, I'm going to only assume that he's probably going to then slipperily like pivot it to something else entirely, and I hope he does not do that, honestly.
It has a core nature which is absolutely non-physical, and it has a fringe nature which is dark, and it's a transition from non-physical to physical.
keep up with his definition, right? Because now, by invoking an imagery of how it is, the texture and everything, what Sadhguru ends up doing is he gives it a sort of physical form in how we understand it to be, right? We imagine how it looks like, how it feels like, how it is. Then we are giving it physical form. That defeats the quite the purpose of the point of nothing. But really, I can assure you, the ones and zeros as concepts do not have any velvety texture or whatever he's describing. They are abstract. They do not have properties as such. That he's trying to make a universal claim, right? He's trying to make a claim that anything which qualifies under nothing ultimately has this particular thing within itself. When we have we have examples like mathematics and numbers which do not have any of these things. So his definition, within his own definition, his example or his elaboration actually fails.
I don't know, we should ask an ophthalmologist why it is so, but when I really look…
Yeah, I get Shunya that that is exactly the problem that he is now talking about, idea or concept of existential reality. Because look at how he defined it in the very beginning. That is why I want all of you to always pay attention to how these people or how anyone defines the words, because oftentimes they define it as one thing that seems intuitive and then they go on to explain something else entirely. See how he describes nothing.
So I'm not referring to nothing in that sense. Probably we would understand it better if you put a hyphen between no and thing. It is not a thing. It is non-physical in nature.
It is not physical in nature. That is something that he is described, right?
So whatever you try to say about it in definition or in description is bound to be wrong even before you utter it, because it's non-physical in nature.
That is the only criteria that he is given, right? It is nothing because it is non-physical in nature. So his definition is that something, that anything which is non-physical in nature qualifies under the criteria of no thing. It qualifies under the criteria of nothing, and therefore the thing that he is referring to is physicalness of it.
So this non-physical nature, if you look at it…
See, then he goes on to make physical claims about something which is he is calling to be non-physical.
It has a fringe nature.
No, Matthew. I would urge you to look into Plato's concepts of theories of forms, but the idea is you understand mathematics through your mind, right? You understand that abstraction through your mind or the electrical impulses within your mind. They serve as a medium to understand an object which we consider to be fundamental in reality, right? My view or brain's image of what one is an understanding of the abstract concept of one that everyone agrees upon, if that makes sense. But yeah, there are a couple of assumptions. Ultimately, the thing is, you'll always end up in the same truth principle, which is the only thing that is capital T truth. The big true is the process of observation, because it does not take any assumptions. It is self-evident, and there was another criteria. It is unfalsifiable because it qualifies these three criteria. Therefore, it is true, the process of observation. Anything else is one illusion on the other, and you can disprove it to some degree. But here we're trying to understand what Sadhguru's model here is, right? I can't keep bringing up my model of truth every single time.
If you look at it, it has a fringe nature. It has a core nature which is absolutely non-physical, and it has a fringe nature which is dark, and it's a transition from non-physical to physical. I don't know, we should ask an ophthalmologist why it is so, but when I really look at the sun or even the moon, particularly when I see the moon, people always… the sun is very much true, but it could be because you are getting blinded by the sun, which I don't, because I used to just stare at the sun for hours at one time. I always see a black halo around the sun, not a white halo. The same with the moon. I think I've asked so many people, they all see white halo. But I always see a black halo around the sun.
I hope he's building up to something rather than just describing I think a spiritual experience that he has.
Because I see the same thing within myself, probably people will think I'm the devil if I say this. The very core of what this is, around that there's always a black halo. And this halo gradually is transiting from non-physical nature to physical nature, which is dark in nature. So, we traditionally, in yogic terminology, we say…
Physical nature, it is dark in nature and therefore it is white. Is he trying to say that abstract concepts are more true? Is that what he is trying to refer to when he is putting in the metaphor of light and dark? Because it's not literally light and dark, right?
Shiva, when he sits still, he is nothing. The word Shiva means… Shiva means that which is not.
Yeah.
That is, he is not. What is creation. What is not is the source of creation. So when you look at this aspect, the very core aspect is a non-existence. And immediately next to that, before the physicality happens, there is a dark face. We call something dark and always…
He's making things up, I guess. I mean, there is existence, there is non-existence, and even within his criteria of what qualifies as nothing, this physical object does not have any dark thing, right? As such, in the sense that there is no ethereal form and then there is nothing and then there is this physical object. It's not quite that. Even if I am taking my brain signal to be what this is, then those are the two ways it can exist or it cannot exist, right? There is no not existence in between my understanding and this physical object existing.
In language and literature and in normal social connotation, the word dark is always understood as remote or even threatening or dangerous or negative. This is essentially because of the way our visual apparatus are made. Suppose you were an owl, you always would think dark as a very bright thing. So, the human perspective of dark being a negative aspect is a very limited way of looking at it. Our sense of vision, essentially. So, when I say…
He's expanding on the metaphor as if it is literal. I'm not sure exactly what he is trying to do with that.
Because of lack of terminology, or if I invent a new word, it won't be any better than dark, so I settle for dark. So this dark dimension is where you can understand the nature of creation. Beyond that, the total non-existent state, that is not a place to understand, that's a place to just merge, which is not the interest of a scientist. And mathematics will not go there. So, in the
way that he described nothing, mathematics literally does exist in that plane, according to his definition.
yogic tradition, we say when he moves, Shiva is a dark one. Always Shiva has been referred to as a dark one. In his ultimate state of Shiva, as Sadhguru, he is utterly still and nobody can feel him unless you're willing to become one with it. But when he moves, his initial phase of movement is dark. When he really comes out and becomes a part of the world, then he is light. So this is, in my perception, somewhere people who saw the nature of creation within themselves are trying to explain this in a personified way. In his core, he is absolutely still. You cannot know where he is. You can only become one with him. If you're willing to be sucked into him, it's all right. But if you want to, in any way transact with him, it is not possible there. But when he begins to stir, he's dark. There, if you want to go, you need courage. You are willing to transcend.
Okay. Shiva being nothing or being stillness is a reference to him being the god of destruction, because destruction ends up resulting in nothing, and he is the result of that metaphysical concept, and that is why he is both the deity of destruction and he is literally stillness. There is that aspect of it, right? He's the aftermath of destruction as well. And this entire concept of becoming one with the universe and becoming one with self, I do agree with it on the basis of the model that I discussed earlier, because reality is within my mind at the end of the day. This bottle exists because my brain tells me that it exists, and therefore anything that happens to me, my brain constructs it in that sense, right? It takes input and it constructs it within my mind, and therefore you can assume someone is a bully to you even if they are not, and you can still get trauma from it because ultimately it's your brain. And when you start living that concept, when you start understanding that everything that you see and everything that you experience is technically you, then you become one with life, one with stillness, and it's a Zen stage. It's a Advaita Vedanta realization. It is a Kashmiri Shaivism understanding embodiment, right? I agree with that. I do not disagree with that. What I do disagree with again is the way that he defined nothing. He made a couple of mistakes. His definition of nothing was inaccurate to what he is talking about right now. One, he is blurring the lines between metaphor and physical things when he is talking about this concept in the way that he is doing. That is two. Third is that he is utilizing light and dark metaphors when he is flip-flopping between it being non-literal and it being literal. So that is the three mistakes that Sadhguru is making. What main point he's trying to say is essentially the point of Kashmiri Shaivism. It is essentially the point of Advaita Vedanta, and I do agree with that particular core of what he's talking about. But his methodology is all over the place, and it is not good.
You're willing to leave everything that you know and enter into a completely different area where you do not know what's the end for you. Or if you want to transact with him properly, when he becomes light, which is creation, you can
See, again, he becomes light, so good, dark, so like bad, so evil. Why light and dark, and why are you correlating them with good and bad, and how does that relate to existence and non-existence? Right? He's blurring all of those boundaries, not very clear in what he's talking about.
transact with him. You can see everything as Shiva and experience it, you can be devout about it, you can worship it, all that. But when you go to the dark phase or beyond that, there is no worship, there is no nothing, it is just dissolution. Which today I feel the modern physics is very much going in this direction. According to the law, according to the yogic law, how it goes is, Shiva was asleep. That means he became totally dead. But he's there. He's still, absolutely. And then Parvati or Shakti came and moved around him 3 times. Then he stirred up. It's from then creation happened. They clearly say they did not copulate. She just went around him 3 times and the basic force of creation began to happen, which was not physical, which was a transition. So this dark face around Shiva began to expand. And then Parvati said, "Is this your creation? Look at this, what you created, just one dark wave of nothing. Is this what you're capable of?" Then he woke up. And then they copulated. Out of their copulation, the whole creation happened.
So Shiva created darkness, and then the copulation of Shiva and Parvati led to creation of what I assume he's going to refer to as the material world, right? That is what he's trying to say.
It could be a metaphor for
It is a metaphor.
scientific understanding of forces and particles.
We have experiments where in absolute vacuum state, if you apply electromagnetic force, suddenly virtual protons and virtual neutrons
particles
happen.
come. Yes, yes,
It doesn't even have to touch.
yes,
Just around that, if you apply
Yes.
electromagnetic force,
Yes.
virtual protons and virtual neutrons happen.
yes,
So he said, what you're saying is very similar. She just goes around
yes.
and creation begins.
I think he's trying to make the point of something can arise from nothingness. I guess that is what he's trying to say.
The spontaneous creation
Yeah.
of particles happens, and they come in pairs. They're always created in pairs.
That's what
which is interesting.
they happen in pairs and then they copulate.
Yes.
That
But it's very similar to a old theory I had, right? Because the question that all that we end up asking ourselves is that if Big Bang or any point, right, God himself, if it came out of nothing, how is that possible, right? How can something come out of nothing? So a logical a logical way around it that I was speculating about was that it's like a zero, right? This is it. This is a zero. That is nothingness. And then understanding of the world, or the way we understand everything, would be the positive terminal, or let's say matter comes, and if matter is created, antimatter should also be created, right? For every matter there will be an antimatter. If I have +1 and if I have -1, the moment I put them together, it will lead to 0, which is nothingness. And that is how things can be created from nothing, because they will ultimately sum total into nothing. So it mathematically holds. And maybe that is what he was trying to say all along, is the fact that the deeper layer is 0, and then there is another layer on top of it which is -1, and then another layer on top of it which is 1, which what we understand. Maybe that is the point that he was going about. He did not go about it very properly. For example, his definition of nothing was very off the mark compared to whatever he ended up landing upon towards the end of it. But this idea is interesting. Definitely, I also had this idea, but I wouldn't say it is a deeper and concentric model, right? There is no deep 0, then -1, then 1. No, there is a 0 at the center, and then +1 and -1 stem out of it in opposite directions. That would be the right model, not this hierarchical or even the concentric circle model.
they touched each other.
And that annihilates to create energy. Those particles, when they annihilate each other, the way the energy forces work is that the electromagnetic forces around create from nothingness a pair of particles, and the pair of particles, when they join, they copulate, actually spontaneously results in the creation of energy. This is a very well accepted scientific principle and verified in experiment.
I think he's referring to Shakti as energy. Interesting. So yeah, I think towards the end of this, I do agree with the idea, or at least it aligns with my own speculative model, or my answer of how can something come from nothing would be this. So this could be the apex of this video, because ultimately this entire live stream ended up being about how can something come from nothing, and this could be an answer, right? Positivity and negativity split out of zero, nothing, and they balance each other out and they total into zero. So yeah, a very interesting idea. I don't again, I have already told what I don't agree with, even the visual imagery, but ideas, I agree with it. I'm not going to say it's logically correct, but it is the way out if you want to understand how nothing can come from something. This is a nice abductive reasoning argument for it. Okay, let's see the comments. Shunya says Shiva and Parvati are just personifications of explanations for a Deva. Shiva is the word nothingness and Parvati Shakti. Yeah, I understand that. I am also uh, ultimately, see, I'm talking about ones and zeros, so I do understand the metaphor of it all, right? I'm just trying to understand how it mechanistically works through the means of that example. Very interesting. I think I had a good time overall. Solid idea, and that's it. I think more or less we're done with what we came to do for the live stream. This ended up going on for a lot longer than what I was anticipating it was going to go for. Thank you everyone for joining. This has been a pleasure. Keep thinking, keep analyzing, and never let go of your ability to critically think, no matter who it is, where it is. And remember, as I always say, patterns, they're everywhere.